The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. The first time I crossed paths with Epstein was in the year 2000 at an event Donald and I attended together. At the time, I had never met Epstein and had no knowledge of his criminal undertaking.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. That's the First Lady of the United States, standing at a podium, angry, leading with a denial, not with compassion for survivors, not with a call for accountability, not with the kind of quiet, dignified statement you'd expect from someone who holds the most symbolically powerful unelected position in the American government. No, she led with a denial. And that right there is the visual I want you to hold in your mind for the next few minutes, because here's the image that captures this entire story. Imagine a massive, ornate tapestry hanging in a grand ballroom. Gold thread, silk fibers, decades of careful weaving. It looks impenetrable, it looks permanent. And then one thread gets pulled, one single thread by a woman in Brazil, and the whole thing starts to unravel from the center outward. That woman's name is Amanda Angaro, and she may be the most important name you haven't been paying attention to. Before we go any further into what Amanda Angaro is alleging, what her social media posts actually say, and why a sitting First Lady felt compelled to respond to them at a formal press conference, make sure you are subscribed to Celebrity Newspedia, because this channel does not just hand you the headline and walk away. We pull on the thread. We follow it through the ballroom floor, down into the foundation, and we tell you exactly what's underneath. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and let's get into this. So let's build this from the ground up, because the structure of what happened here matters as much as the facts themselves. Melania Trump walks to a podium, reporters are assembled, cameras are rolling, and instead of opening with the kind of statement a First Lady typically makes, the kind that projects authority and grace and moral clarity, she opens with personal defense. She opens with self-exoneration. And then, halfway through, she pivots to call for congressional hearings for Epstein survivors.
I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. Give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. Each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public if she wishes, and then her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record. Then, and only then, we will have.
The second half of that statement is genuinely significant. We'll get there. But the first half is what this video is about. Because when someone in a position of that much institutional power, with that much media infrastructure around them, with an entire White House communications apparatus at their disposal, chooses to lead with a denial, the forensic question you have to ask yourself is simple. What made them feel like they had no choice?
The fuse for Melania Trump to angrily take to a podium just the other day and start off by denying her links to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, we just had a remarkable event, right? But structurally, it was odd because she didn't lead Melania with, I'm the First Lady and I want dignity and justice for the survivors and the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and there should be hearings. No, that was the second half. The first half is that she angrily denied any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump likes to talk about a lot of first. You know, he happens to be the president during the 250th anniversary of America and its birth. Well, we just saw something remarkable. The first time in 250 years, a First Lady had to admit in public that she had no connection to a child sex trafficking ring. Amanda Angaro, a former Brazilian model who...
Revenge is not a national security strategy. That phrase is going to come back. Remember it. Let's start with Amanda Angaro. Who is she, actually, underneath the tabloid framing and the social media posts and the accusations? She is a former Brazilian model. She was brought to the United States as a young woman to work in the modeling industry. She has alleged, and these are her allegations reported across multiple outlets, that at 17 years old, she was transported from Paris, where she had been working, to the United States on a plane belonging to Jeffrey Epstein. She has alleged that during and around that period, she witnessed and experienced things connected to Epstein's world that she has described in explicit terms in interviews and social media posts. These are allegations. She's making them publicly, consistently, and with increasing specificity. Now, why does her specific biography matter to the Melania story? Because of a man named Paolo Zampoli. Here's where you need to pay close attention. Paolo Zampoli is not a peripheral figure.
Was married to the person who owned a modeling agency that connected Donald Trump and Melania Trump, introduced them in 1998 at the Kit Kat Club, Paolo Zampoli. Paolo Zampoli is currently in the inner circle of Donald Trump and Melania. Okay? He owned a modeling agency in the 1990s called the ID Models. He discussed opening a modeling agency with Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. He connected and introduced Melania, who he recruited from Slovenia himself, into the Donald Trump world. We know that's true. We know that Amanda Angaro was married to Paolo Zampoli.
He is not a footnote. He owned a modeling agency in the 1990s called ID Models. He recruited Melania from Slovenia. He introduced Melania to Donald Trump at the Kit Kat Club in New York City in 1998. Without Paolo Zampoli, the entire Trump-Melania romantic origin story does not exist. He is the connective tissue of that introduction. And Donald Trump rewarded him. Zampoli was appointed as a special envoy, a role that carries diplomatic weight and proximity to the inner circle of presidential power. He attended the 2017 inauguration.
You know, that he was rewarded with an ambassadorship by Trump. She was rewarded by an ambassadorship by Grenada. And they were in the inner circle of the Trump world. In fact, they attended the 2017 inauguration. And by all reports, Amanda Angaro sat at Melania's table, the First Lady's table, during the inauguration. Things went awry after she accused her husband of philandering, of cheating on her, of sending lewd messages to a sex worker, and ultimately of pedophilia. And attacked Paolo Zampoli, leading to a bitter divorce. He then had her removed by ICE because
he was not a distant acquaintance from decades ago. He was present. He was rewarded. He was inside. Amanda Angaro was married to Paolo Zampoli. Let that settle for a moment. The woman now publicly alleging that Melania Trump knew about her connections to Jeffrey Epstein's world was married to the man who recruited Melania from Slovenia, introduced her to Donald Trump, discussed opening a modeling agency with both Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, and was later given a diplomatic appointment as a reward for his loyalty. Amanda Angaro did not sit at the outer rings of this story. She reportedly sat at Melania's own table during the 2017 inaugural dinner. That is not 6 degrees of separation. That is the same table. Now, let's add the third name into this triangle, because this is where the architecture gets genuinely dark. Jean-Luc Brunel. He was a modeling agent. He was Amanda Angaro's agent specifically during the period she is described in her allegations. And Jean-Luc Brunel died in a French prison cell in 2022 while awaiting trial on charges of rape and sexual assault of minors, charges deeply connected to his documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He is one of multiple figures in the Epstein ecosystem.
She had overstayed a visa. That's why she's down in Brazil. Amanda Angaro claims that at 17, she was brought to the United States on Jeffrey Epstein's plane from Paris, where she was modeling and was abused and observed things related to Jeffrey Epstein. And by her claims, which I'm going to read to you now, that she's done in reporting, is that Melania knew everything about Jeffrey Epstein and everything about her husband and another gentleman by the name of Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the agent for Amanda Angaro and who died in a French jail about child sex trafficking and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah.
Who died in custody before facing a verdict. So you have Amanda Angaro, who says she was flown on Epstein's plane at 17. Her agent was Jean-Luc Brunel, who died in a French cell facing Epstein-linked charges. She married Paolo Zampoli, who introduced Melania to Trump, discussed a modeling agency with Epstein and Trump, and was rewarded with a diplomatic post. And Melania reportedly sat across from Amanda at the inaugural dinner in 2017. This is not a conspiracy theory.
That Melania knew that Jeffrey Epstein had brought her from Paris on his plane when she was 17 into the United States. That Melania, of course, knew her agent, Jean-Luc Brunel, and he was involved with Epstein and child sex trafficking. And he knew Jean-Luc Brunel. That Amanda eventually marries Paolo Zampoli, who had brought Melania in from Slovenia and introduced Melania to Donald Trump at the Kit Kat Club in 1998. And they were all part of this world. And that through her relationship, friendship with Amanda Angaro, that Melania knew and should have known about what Jeffrey Epstein was all about.
These are documented connections, reported relationships, and a web of proximity that Amanda Angaro is now pulling on in public with the full force of her anger, her grief, and what she says is her direct personal knowledge. Here's what she posted, directed at Melania Trump.
Now, here's what Amanda Angaro, former wife of Paola Zampoli, here's what she was posting at or around the same time. This is directed to Melania. I will tear down your corrupt system, even if it's the last thing I do in my life. I will go all the way. I'm not afraid. Maybe you should be afraid of what I know of who you are and who your husband is. She also said that she was going to take legal action against Trump and her pedophile husband, that's Paolo Zampoli, while alleging longstanding ties to the former model. In other words, here's the connect the dots that she's doing. Here's the
I will tear down your corrupt system, even if it's the last thing I do in my life. I will go all the way. I'm not afraid. Maybe you should be afraid of what I know of who you are and who your husband is. And separately, I've known you for 20 years. You knew I was detained by ICE. You were present in my life every year on my son's birthday, even sending Secret Service and being the first to congratulate him back in 2016. Something was clearly wrong, but I'm not part of any evil mission involving children. So what did you do, Melania? You tried to involve me, but you failed because I have character. Read those words again, slowly.
She continues in her postings in and around the time of that press conference. I've known you for 20 years, she directs to Melania. You knew I was detained in ICE. See, what happened is during a bitter custody battle, after she accused her husband, special envoy for Donald Trump, Zampoli, of infidelity and cheating, he hired a lawyer, according to her and reporting, hired a lawyer to rat her out to ICE because she had overstayed a tourist visa. She had married a doctor in Miami and was living there, and they deported her back to Brazil. She continues in her posts. You knew I was detained in ICE. You were present in my life every year on my son's birthday, even sending Secret Service and being the first to congratulate him back in 2016. Something was clearly wrong, but I'm not part of any evil mission involving children. So what did you do, Melania? You tried to involve me, but you failed because I have character.
Because whoever wrote that, whether you believe her or not, whether you find her credible or not, wrote it with the intimacy of someone who is inside, who attended the birthday parties, who received the congratulations, who moved in those circles. This is not an outsider throwing stones at a wall. This is someone who says she was in the room, who says she sat at the table, who says she knows what was discussed and what was known and what was covered up, and who says she is no longer willing to stay quiet about any of it. Revenge is not a national security strategy. But here is the twist in this story that most coverage is glossing over. It's not just that Amanda Angaro is angry. It's the specific reason she says she was forced into this position in the first place. After her marriage to Paolo Zampoli collapsed, after she accused him publicly of infidelity, of sending explicit messages to a sex worker, and of pedophilia, she found herself in a brutal custody battle. And then something happened that has become a recurring feature of conflicts involving people close to this administration. Someone called ICE. According to Amanda Angaro, and reporting that has corroborated elements of her account, Paolo Zampoli, or people acting on his behalf, reported her to Immigration and Customs Enforcement for overstaying a tourist visa. She had married a doctor in Miami, she had a son here, she had a life here, and she was removed. She was deported back to Brazil while fighting a custody battle.
This was over the battle over their 15-year-old, and that led before Angaro and her husband were arrested in June. She was also, now to be fair, not every life is perfect. Amanda Angaro was also arrested and indicted for some fraud related to some medical spas. So I think you need to know that in terms of these allegations. But she's out there. And if that was going on and being picked up in social media and repeated 1 million times, that may have been the final straw for Melania Trump, not to tell the truth, but to take to a podium at that particular press conference.
For her 15-year-old child. Now think about what that means in context. A woman who was accusing the special diplomatic envoy for the President of the United States of pedophilia and infidelity, who had direct personal knowledge of that envoy's relationships with people in the Epstein orbit, who had sat at the First Lady's table at the inauguration, suddenly found herself flagged to immigration authorities and removed from the country during her custody fight. We are not in the business of claiming that is definitively retaliation. We are in the business of asking the question, because the question demands to be asked. And because the pattern of using immigration enforcement as a weapon against inconvenient people is not a hypothetical in this political moment. It is documented, it is consistent, and it is something that congressional oversight should be examining with the same urgency it applies to any other abuse of federal power. Revenge is not a national security strategy. Now let's talk about Melania's statement itself, because the architecture of that statement tells you something that the words alone do not. She did not open by saying, as any victim advocate would, that she stands with the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. She did not open by saying she is appalled by what Epstein did and that justice must be served. She did not open with empathy for the women who were trafficked, abused, and silenced for years, while powerful men protected each other and wrote checks and flew on planes and attended parties. She opened with self-defense, a specific, pointed denial.
I think it's remarkable that she structured it to defend herself first, right? I have never, with a crooked finger. And then, oh, by the way, while I'm up here, yes, there should be justice for the victims. I mean, maybe Amanda Angaro would be one of the people that's going to testify, I just interviewed Lisa Phillips, a survivor, a client of mine, about the reaction to Melania. And at the very, I think she took a very pragmatic approach, which is good. Now that the First Lady is
almost prosecutorial self-defense. I am not Epstein's victim. Fine, we take her at her word. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. True, by all available accounts, it was Zampoli who made that introduction. The first time I crossed paths with Epstein was in the year 2000 at an event Donald and I attended together. Okay, noted. At the time, I had never met Epstein and had no knowledge of his criminal undertakings. That last sentence is where it gets complicated, not because we have proof she did have knowledge, we don't, but because the frame of "I had no knowledge of his criminal undertakings" is doing a lot of work. The question Amanda Angaro is raising is not whether Melania was a victim of Epstein, or whether Epstein introduced her to Trump. The question is whether through her husband, through Zampoli,
Through the overlapping world of modeling agencies and wealthy men and young women and exclusive events, she knew more about what that world was than she is now claiming. That is a harder question, and it is a question Melania's carefully worded statement does not actually answer. Journalist Michael Wolff, who has been doing his own reporting in this space and who has appeared in media discussing his findings, has reported that Melania was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane at some point. He has reported that the social and professional overlap between Trump's world and Epstein's world was tighter and more sustained than the current White House framing suggests. He is a credentialed journalist making specific claims based on sourcing. Those claims deserve scrutiny and verification. But they exist, they are part of the record, and they form part of the backdrop against which Melania felt the need to convene a press conference and defend herself in public. So what actually triggered the statement? Who pulled the fuse?
Let's get down to the story of Amanda Angaro. Here's what it looks like to many people, just sequencing events. See, when I saw this angry response from Melania, which she led off with, I'm thinking, well, this must be from the world of Michael Wolff, the journalist. Because Michael Wolff, and he's been on Legal AF, Michael Wolff has reported, and this is his journalistic integrity reporting, that Melania had been on Jeffrey Epstein's plane at one time, that ultimately the world of Epstein and Trump and Melania was tighter than she wants to admit, and he knew about Paolo Zampoli and the introduction, and that and basically suggests that she knew or should have known about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
The best available read right now is this. It was Amanda Angaro. Her social media posts, seen by over 1 million people, directed personally at Melania with the specificity of someone who attended the birthday parties and sat at the table, crossed a threshold.
And I thought that's what led to this press conference. But now the more I look into it, it may be Amanda Angaro posting in social media that's been seen by over 1 million people, trying to take down the First Lady and calling her a fraud because she knows more about Epstein than she's letting on. Let's play the Melania clip first.
It was not the journalist reporting. It was not some distant, abstract allegation from a stranger. It was someone Melania knew. Someone who had been in her life for 20 years, who had been at her inauguration dinner, who was now publicly saying, in the blunt language of personal betrayal, that the First Lady knew things she is pretending not to know. And that, structurally, is why the press conference looked the way it did. When you are defending yourself against a journalist, you issue a statement through your communications team. When you are defending yourself against someone who is at your table and is now telling the public what they say they saw from that table, you go to the podium yourself, because the intimacy of the accusation requires the intimacy of a personal denial. Now, let's be precise about something, because fairness demands it. Amanda Angaro is not without complexity. She was arrested and faced fraud charges related to medical spas during the same period. That is part of her record, and it matters when assessing her credibility. It does not automatically invalidate her other claims, because the history of Epstein-adjacent cases is full of instances where accusers had complicated histories and their testimony was still essential to establishing the truth. But it is part of the picture, and any honest accounting of the story has to include it. Here is the unanswered question that this entire story circles around and cannot escape. If all of these connections, Zampoli introducing Melania to Trump, Zampoli discussing a modeling agency with Epstein and Trump, Brunel serving as Angaro's agent and dying in an Epstein-linked French prison cell, Angaro sitting at Melania's inaugural table, Angaro being deported during her custody battle against Trump's special envoy, if all of that is publicly documented and the threads all visibly connect, why has there been no formal congressional inquiry into the specific role of modeling agencies in the broader Epstein trafficking network? The women who came through those agencies, who were recruited in Eastern Europe and South America and brought to the United States and placed into proximity with wealthy men at exclusive events, those women are survivors too. Their stories are part of the Epstein ledger. And the fact that the modeling industry's role in that ecosystem has been systematically underexamined is not an accident. It is a deliberate gap. And it is a gap that, ironically, Melania's own call for congressional hearings now has the potential to close. Because here is the thing that Epstein survivor Lisa Phillips understood immediately when she heard Melania's statement, that the second half of the press conference, the call for hearings, the call for sworn congressional testimony, the call for survivor stories to be permanently entered into the congressional record.
Epstein and Ghislaine, it's going to include a lot of other powerful men.
So a lot of these dots have been well known. We've thrown up some pictures of Amanda Angaro and Melania Trump. The relationship between Amanda Angaro and Paolo Zampoli, the relationship between Amanda Angaro and Jean-Luc Brunel, the relationship between Melania and Zampoli, Melania and Brunel, Trump and all of these people, Epstein and Brunel and Zampoli, and therefore Angaro. And that's what Amanda Angaro is saying, which is, Melania, I know you know. I know you know I know. I'm going to tear you down because you've destroyed my own life and you've tried to destroy my life and you're trying to rewrite history. And then you've got the enter angry first lady.
That matters. It matters enormously. Not because we should uncritically accept the framing of how we got there or ignore the self-interested elements of the statement, but because the mechanism being called for is real.
Calling for hearings, we're going to get the hearings. Now, how we got there, is less important. Let me play the clip for Lisa Phillips.
And that next step wasn't for her. The next step was for the survivors. She feels something for the survivors, or I don't think she would do it. She's not a monster. She has empathy. Not her husband. She's taking a stand, whether he agreed or not. I feel like she was like, I want to do something. And this is a big deal. She said each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public. That's huge. And then she said her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record. Do you know how big that will be to have testimony from survivors? If you want to hear the stories of survivors, it doesn't just include.
Congressional hearings with sworn testimony under oath have the power to compel disclosure that no social media post and no journalistic investigation can compel. That is the tool. And if Melania Trump, whether out of genuine empathy, political calculation, personal anger at the people making allegations against her, or some combustible combination of all three, has just handed that tool to the survivors and their advocates, then the outcome may ultimately serve justice, even if the path that led there was deeply compromised. But we cannot separate the outcome from the process. We cannot look at this press conference and say, wonderful, we got what we needed, let's not ask any more questions. Because the questions about what Paolo Zampoli knew, what Melania knew, what Amanda Angaro witnessed, what role the modeling industry played in funneling young women into Epstein's orbit, those questions are not resolved by a press conference denial. They are opened by it. Every denial is also a deposition.
Considered by MAGA to be the greatest first lady of all time. Sorry, Eleanor Roosevelt. Sorry, Rosalind Carter. Sorry, Jackie Kennedy. Fill in the blank. You're one of the Bush first ladies. Michelle Obama. No, it was Melania. Her polling rating now for a person who's not doing her job. I mean, let's be frank. She's got a no show, no work job right now. She barely goes to the White House. But her favorability ratings may be even lower than Donald Trump's. They used to be higher. They're not. They're not any longer. I think she's polling in the low 30%. Well, what to expect? That we just had a filing in a case. The battle over
Every public statement of innocence is also a specific set of claims that can be tested, corroborated, or contradicted by the evidence that follows. When Melania said the first time she crossed paths with Epstein was in the year 2000, she created a verifiable statement. Either there is evidence that contradicts that timeline or there is not. Either Michael Wolff's reporting about her being on Epstein's plane holds up to scrutiny or it does not. Either Amanda Angaro's claim that Melania knew about the trafficking network, knew about Brunel, knew about what happened on those planes can be substantiated with testimony and documentation, or it cannot. We do not yet know the answer. That is the honest statement. We do not yet know. But here is what we do know. We know that Melania Trump's favorability ratings.
Her polling rating now for a person who's not doing her job, I mean, let's be frank, she's got a no-show, no-work job right now. She barely goes to the White House. But her favorability ratings may be even lower than Donald Trump's. They used to be higher. They're not. They're not any longer. I think she's polling in the low 30%. Well, what to expect? That we just had a filing in a case, the battle over the ballroom, where the lawyers for the National Trust basically said, I don't know what they implied. I don't know why you're talking about the personal safety of the president's family. The family's not in the White House. The first lady is not in the White House. You want to talk about personal security? I guess you can talk about the president, but nobody else is there. They didn't say it quite that way, but they left out reference to the first lady when they talked about personal security concerns. So I thought,
which were once among the highest of any modern first lady, at least within the circles that supported her husband, have now dropped into the low 30s. We know that she is spending remarkably little time at the White House. We know that when the lawyers defending the use of Mar-a-Lago recently filed arguments about personal security concerns for the president's family, they conspicuously omitted specific reference to the First Lady.
It was very funny, and I wanted to report on it. You're here on Legal AF. Take a minute. Great news, everybody. I think 6 more days left for the Webby Awards People's Voice Award. The Intersection, my podcast on Tuesday night, is in first place for best podcast in news, all podcasts. And the Legal AF podcast, 6 years old now, is in first place for best news podcast. And this is the award we really want to win because it's with you.
That is a tell. Not a definitive one, but a tell. We know that Amanda Angaro is in Brazil, fighting from a distance to be heard, fighting for access to her child, fighting against a specific form of institutional force that she says was deployed against her when she became inconvenient. And we know that she has now directed that fight at the most visible possible target, not at Paolo Zampoli alone, not at Jeffrey Epstein's estate, at Melania Trump directly, because she says the First Lady was present. She says the First Lady knew. She says she was part of Melania's life for 20 years, and that Melania's current performance of ignorance and victimhood is, in her direct words, a lie. Is Amanda Angaro a perfect witness? No. Is she a complicated figure with her own legal history and her own motivations? Yes. Does that automatically disqualify her claims from serious examination? Absolutely not. Because the entire history of how Epstein's crimes were covered up for so long is a history of powerful institutions dismissing complicated witnesses, of saying she has a record so we don't have to listen, of saying she has an agenda so her testimony doesn't count. That is how predatory systems protect themselves, by finding the flaw in the person pointing at them and using that flaw to make the pointing disappear. We are not going to do that here. The thread that Amanda Angaro has pulled.
Now, if the byproduct of all that is that there's going to finally be dignity and justice for the survivors, how we got there, listen, if the ends justify the means, I'm all for it. But I would be remiss if I'm not going to report about Amanda Angaro and get to the bottom of it and the allegations concerning it, especially if somebody's going to take to the airwaves like the First Lady and use her bully pulpit to try to claim that she is innocent. Now, by the way, for somebody who in the first term was...
The First Lady stood at a podium and led with a denial. That is where this story begins. One thread, from Brazil to Washington, and the tapestry is still moving. Here is your assignment before you come back to this channel for the next update. The civil filings and public reporting related to Jean-Luc Brunel's connections in the United States are partially in the public record. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial transcripts are available. The Virginia Giuffre civil filings reference specific names and specific networks. Go read them, not the summaries, the documents themselves, and then come back and answer this question in the comments. Based on what you read in the public record, do you believe the modeling industry's role in the Epstein network has been fully investigated? Yes or no, and tell us why. Because that is the question that Melania's press conference, whether intentionally or not, has now put back on the table. And the survivors who are waiting for those congressional hearings deserve an answer that comes from evidence, not from podiums.
If this breakdown gave you something the headlines didn't, you know what to do. Like this video so it reaches the people who need to see it, share it with someone who is following this story but not getting the depth they need, and subscribe to Celebrity Newspedia right now if you haven't already, and turn on your notifications because this story is not over. It is accelerating. There are more names, more documents, more connections that are about to become impossible to ignore, and when they do, Celebrity Newspedia will be right here, pulling on the thread, following it through the floor, and telling you exactly what's underneath. The First Lady stood at a podium and led with a denial. That is where this story begins.
Let's remember the name Amanda Angaro because she may be the connect the dot between Melania Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. And it may be Amanda Angaro and her social media posts in the same time period that led and lit the fuse for Melania Trump to angrily take to a podium just the other day and start off by denying her links to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, we just had a remarkable event, right? But structurally, it was odd because she didn't lead Melania with, I'm the First Lady and I want dignity and justice for the survivors and the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and there should be hearings. No, that was the second half. The first half is that she angrily denied any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Donald Trump likes to talk about a lot of first. You know, he happens to be the president during the 250th anniversary of America and its birth. Well, we just saw something remarkable. The first time in 250 years, a first lady had to admit in public that she had no connection to a child sex trafficking ring. Amanda Angaro, a former Brazilian model who was
Not where it ends.